It is that time once again. It happens twice a year. Ubuntu release date. Today, Ubuntu 1904 Disco Dingo was released. Also, the other main flavors of Ubuntu: Xubuntu, Xubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Monta, all released version 1904, codenamed Disco Dingo. Let's take a look. Disco Dingo. I love that name. That is the best code name for a version of Linux since Bionic Beaver. It's probably that good. As a matter of fact, they should have saved Disco Dingo for an LTS, like they saved Bionic Beaver for an LTS. Disco Dingo, that is wasted on a interim release that's only going to be supported for 9 months. They should have saved that thing for 2004, but too late now. So we're going to take a look at 6 different Ubuntu flavors today, just briefly. This will be a whirlwind tour of Ubuntu, Xubuntu, Xubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Monta. I've got all 6 installed in a VM, all 6 running at the same time on my main production machine today. We're going to take a look at each one, some of the new features for 1904 compared to previous releases of each version. And we may even do some comparisons of these 6 flavors of Ubuntu. Let's get started. Today I'm going to be taking a look at these 6 flavors of Ubuntu in a VM in a virtual machine. I'm going to use VirtualBox today, and I'm going to use the same settings for all 6 VMs. That way we can get some kind of comparison as far as system resource usage. So all 6 VMs I'm going to give 2 cores of my 24-core CPU. That's actually a 12-core, 24-thread Threadripper that I have on my main production machine, so I have the option of choosing up to 24 CPUs for each VM. I'm going to give each VM 2 cores. I am going to go to display and give the maximum of 128 megs of video memory to each VM. I'm going to enable 3D acceleration in all 6 VMs. I created a 15 gig virtual hard drive for each VM, and I gave each VM 4 gigs of RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up these 6 VMs, and we'll take a look at each one very briefly, one at a time, and then I may do some comparisons between the 6 as all 6 are running. I may also include a screenshot of HTOP to show you my system as far as how my 12-core 24-thread Threadripper and the 32 gigs of RAM I have on this machine handle running these 6 VMs with the specs I gave them all at the same time. See if it taxes my machine or if my new machine handles this like a champ. So let's start with Ubuntu, the main edition, the flagship edition. So if I log in here to Ubuntu 1904 Disco Dingo, it's going to take a second. All right, this is the first time launching it, so it may be a little slower to get into the very first time. When you're first logging into Ubuntu 1904, it asks you about connecting to your online accounts. I can't actually move this window. We actually have to answer it. Do I want to connect to Ubuntu single sign-on, Google, Nextcloud, Microsoft, any online services? I do use Nextcloud, but I don't want to connect to it through this. I'm just going to skip it for now. Help improve Ubuntu. Would you like to send this information to Canonical? So do you want to send some telemetry stuff back to Canonical to help them improve the distro? I do not mind doing that. As long as they ask, I'm okay with it. If it was, under the table trying to be sneaky, I would have a problem with it. But if you're up front and, hey, you want to know a little more about, the hardware I use on my computer to help make a better Linux distribution, why not? I'm okay with giving that information. Privacy. Do we want to allow applications to determine our geographical location? You know what? I will leave that off. I'm kind of a privacy kind of guy. I don't like giving out more information than absolutely necessary. Do I want to install any of these programs? I'm assuming these are probably the snap packs for Visual Studio Code and Spotify and, various other things, Discord. Some of these I do use. I use Discord, GIMP, but I wouldn't want to install the snap version of GIMP. A VLC, I do have the snap version of VLC actually installed on my main production machine. But for now, I'm going to skip all this. I want to just keep the install as is out of the box. So I'm going to click Done. You will notice Ubuntu 1904 is very, very beautiful. It's a clean, polished look. They have made some major improvements as far as to the interface, the theming of the GNOME shell, the GTK theme. If I open up the Nautilus file manager here, you will see beautiful icon set, the beautiful GTK theme, and one of the best default wallpapers, maybe the best default wallpaper Ubuntu has had possibly since Ubuntu 8.04, 11 years ago. Ubuntu 8.04 was Hardy Heron, and it had just an absolutely gorgeous wallpaper with a heron, a bird on it. But Disco Dingo, I gotta admit, this is a very sharp looking wallpaper. I would consider using this wallpaper on any system I installed, whether I was using Ubuntu or not. Heck, if I was using Xubuntu, I'd probably use this Disco Dingo wallpaper from Ubuntu on my desktop. It's that good. Probably the biggest thing you'll notice about Ubuntu 19.04, which is it's not a major change from the previous versions of Ubuntu that installed GNOME by default. Since the switch from Unity to GNOME, there really hasn't been any major changes to the desktop. They've all pretty much looked the same. Again, the theming is a little better, but it's minor. But one thing you will notice is major speed improvements. Even in this VM with 2 cores of my 24-thread CPU and 4 gigs of RAM, is the animations in this VM are just amazingly smooth. If I go, and check out some of this and the calendar, everything just works. Launching the programs, the file manager here, the animations are very clean. I mean, there is some eye candy to this desktop, and it just works. In a VM, it just works. On physical hardware, this would probably fly, which would blow my mind, because I've been very critical of GNOME over the past few years since GNOME 3. It's because of how bloated and slow and buggy the GNOME desktop environment can be. But this is probably the fastest version of the GNOME desktop I have seen to date as far as the GNOME 3 desktop. One thing worth taking a look at is, by default, the mainline edition of Ubuntu does install some snap packs for core utilities on the system, and there have been some performance problems with some of those pre-installed snap packs in the past. So let's take a look at what snaps are installed on the system by default. So in all the main versions of Ubuntu, Control-Alt-T is a hotkey for bringing up the terminal. So Control-Alt-T should get us a terminal. I'm going to go in here in the GNOME terminal and zoom in a little bit. Alright, and then I'm going to cd into /var/lib/snapd/snaps. And then if I do an ls to list everything in that directory, it should tell me all the snaps that are installed on the system. And the snaps I have, it looks like, are GNOME Calculator, GNOME Characters, the logs, GNOME System Monitor. So the System Monitor is one in particular that I remember in the past could sometimes take forever to launch on the previous versions of Ubuntu that it was installed as a snap. So let me go to the System Monitor and see how fast it starts up now. And I click on it, and I wait. Okay, that actually wasn't too bad. If I close the System Monitor out, let me try to launch it again and see if maybe that was just, the very first time you try to launch it. Yes, so now it pretty much launches instantly, or as instantly as most graphical programs tend to launch. So that actually wasn't too bad. I do know on the previous 2 versions of Ubuntu, sometimes that System Monitor, when I took a look at the GNOME edition, the mainline edition of Ubuntu, could take a minute, sometimes 2 minutes to launch, especially that very first time. I think it was a problem with font caching. There was a problem with how snap packages handled font caching that was causing some of these snaps on Ubuntu to take forever and a day to load, but I think it looks like they've ironed out that problem, at least for the System Monitor. Let's try the GNOME Characters program just to check one more snap. So we launch that, see how long this takes. This too is taking a little longer than what I would like, but again, that was the very first time I've ever run that program since this installation. So try it one more time, and yeah, a little faster, but still a little sluggish. I'm not sure if that would be any different if I installed that in the standard repos rather than a snap. I would suspect it would, though. One of the new features introduced in GNOME 3.32 was fractional scaling. So if I go and search for displays and open the display settings, I really don't have fractional settings here. I have 100% and 200%, but I have nothing in between. I should have 125, 150, and 175 also available, but that is only available in GNOME 3.32 if you use the Wayland display server. And by default, 1904 uses Xorg. Wayland is installed and you can log in using the Wayland display server. You just have to choose that at the login manager. Of course, you know, Wayland is not exactly ready for prime time. If you're using an NVIDIA card with the NVIDIA proprietary drivers, Wayland really isn't an option for you. Fractional scaling is there if you have an AMD card and you want to use Wayland. If we open up a couple of programs here, so I opened up the file manager, I opened up the terminal. Heck, let's open up the software center, the Ubuntu software center. We may take a look at that in just a second. And I have 3 programs open. Now the Alt-Tab key combination should switch windows by default. So if I just do a single Alt-Tab, now I go to the terminal one more time, I go back to the software center one more time, back to the terminal. If I hold Alt and Tab, you will see I have the option of going to the file manager. You know, it's rather clean, rather nice actually how they handle the window switching. The window order here in this doc is based on the order that we launched the programs, I think. So if I kill all these programs and we relaunch them, so I'm going to launch the file manager first, I'm going to launch the terminal second, and this time I'm going to launch the Ubuntu Software Center third. Again, we get file manager, terminal, Ubuntu Software Center in that order here in the doc. So that is how it determines their place on the screen as far as the window switching behavior. One last thing we should take a look at while we're focusing solely on Ubuntu 1904 is some of the default applications installed. So they do have Firefox, and this should be the latest version of Firefox, which Firefox is on version 66. So if I go to About Firefox, yes, Firefox Quantum 66.0.3 is the version of Firefox. Those of you interested in LibreOffice, the LibreOffice suite is here, and I believe they are using the latest LibreOffice as well, which should be 6.2. Yeah, 6.2.2.2 is the latest version of LibreOffice. Other than Firefox and Thunderbird and LibreOffice here in the doc, what other programs are installed by default on Ubuntu 1904? There's really not too much. Ubuntu really isn't a bloated distro, in my opinion. It does have some basic stuff, things you need. Everybody needs a web browser. I like having the LibreOffice suite installed, but other than that, you know, you have a few of the standard GNOME applications like Rhythmbox or the multimedia player. You have Transmission, the BitTorrent client, Shotwheel, the photo manager. Not much else. VirtualBox was not installed by default. That is the VirtualBox guest editions that I was installing so I could get a proper screen resolution here. The last thing we should take a look at is probably the most important change here in Ubuntu 1904, and the underlying base system is going to be the same for all 6 flavors. So this should be the same kernel version for all the flavors. So if I do a unamespace-r, we get the kernel version 5.0.0-13-generic. So it is on Linux kernel 5.0. So 5.0 should help bring some major performance improvements. Those of you running really bleeding edge hardware, those of you like me that I'm running a Radeon 7, an AMD Radeon 7 graphics card, having a newer kernel like 5.0 is really good, where if I was running an older kernel, maybe an older LTS kernel like 4.14, I could have some problems with such new hardware. So that is probably the biggest improvement for all 6 versions of Ubuntu, is the fact that they are running this very fresh 5.0 kernel. Let's take a look at Xubuntu 1904 Disco Dingo. So let's log into Xubuntu. So Xubuntu is going to be using, of course, the KDE Plasma desktop. They will be using the latest KDE Plasma, I think it's 5.15.4. So it's the 4th point release of the 5.15 desktop. Much like the main edition of Ubuntu, Xubuntu is very clean, very polished. I will say the wallpaper, although I like the wallpaper, the default wallpaper is a little lacking compared to the Dingo wallpaper in the main edition of Ubuntu. I know that's a trivial thing, but you know what? First impressions matter. Now, the recent versions of Plasma have been making major improvements as far as resource usage and performance. I will say even in a VM only giving this 2 cores of my 12-core 24-thread processor, it runs like a champ. I mean, it just works. If I open up the Discover Software Center here, it takes a minute to launch, but that is more of a problem with the Software Center because you know, it just takes Software Centers usually a long time to launch because they have to get a lot of information, sometimes download a lot of information from the web. But if I launch a more standard application like Dolphin, the file manager, you see very instant. Really nice animations. The animations are very smooth, even in a VM. Once again, you know, on physical hardware, I'm sure Xubuntu 1904 would just fly. The Alt-Tab behavior from the mainline edition of Ubuntu is a little different in Xubuntu, but it works very much the same. So you Alt-Tab, you hold it down, and you have a little dock, except instead of in the center of the screen, it takes up this side panel. Well, it shows you what's open, and you can navigate between the open windows. I will say that the font in everything here in Discover, the Discover Software Center, is not quite right. So we have a white background here, but the text is also white, so I can't read anything in Discover. I don't know if that's just a bug here in this VM. Maybe it would be fixed if I did an update to the system. I'm not sure if there are any updates available. Since this is a really new release, I don't know, but let's run it. Sudo apt update to update the repos, and then we need to and sudo apt upgrade to actually upgrade all the packages that have an upgrade available. I would be shocked if there were any upgrades available though. Not just one, distro info-data. I'm not sure if that's all that important. I'll just decline that update for now. Xubuntu 1904 is using the latest KDE applications. 18.12.3 is the application suite. It also comes installed with Firefox by default, Firefox 66. It also has the LibreOffice suite, again 6.2.2.2. You want to take a look at some of the other applications installed by default just briefly. Under the graphics category, we have GwenView, Ocular, Scanlight. If I go back to the applications category, under Internet, Aggregator, which is a really nice RSS feed reader that Plasma uses. Aggregator with a K. The naming scheme with KDE is kind of ridiculous with all the Ks. We also take a look at Internet here. We have Kmail Conversation, which is an IRC chat client, a very nice IRC chat client conversation. We also have the multimedia category. Cantata is the music player. It is a MPD music player, so you have to set up MPD, but it is really nice. Two other things worth noting for those of you that want to try Xubuntu 1904. If you want to run a Wayland session on Xubuntu 1904, Wayland is not installed by default like it is in Ubuntu 1904. So you can't log into a Wayland session at the login manager, but you can install a Wayland session. You need to install the package plasma-workspace-wayland from the repos, and then you should be able to log into Wayland at your login manager. Also, those of you that like to use the Latte Dock with the Plasma desktop environment, the latest release, the latest stable release of Latte Dock is now in the Ubuntu repositories where it was not previously. Let's move on to Xubuntu 1904. Xubuntu, of course, comes with the XFCE desktop environment. Because it uses the XFCE desktop environment, which doesn't change, sometimes it goes years between having major point releases. There's not going to be that much to cover for Xubuntu 1904 compared to previous versions of Xubuntu, such as 1810 and 1804. But one thing I will make note of, those of you that want to try out these Ubuntu flavors in VirtualBox, Xubuntu was the only one of the 6 versions I tried that I could not get the VirtualBox guest editions working. The other 5 flavors, all I needed to do was bring up a terminal and install the VirtualBox Guest Utils, the VirtualBox Guest X11 package, and the VirtualBox Guest DKMS package. You install those 3 packages, and you should have VirtualBox Guest Editions working. When you reboot, it worked on all the other 5 flavors. It does not work here in Xubuntu for some reason. But if I bring up a terminal and I do a XR and R, well, if I can type right, XR and R, it will give me some available screen resolutions I could switch to here using the XR and R command. So if I type XR and R space -S, let's see, the most appropriate one, 1680 by 1050 would probably work. It will not actually look that great because I have a 1920 by 1080 monitor, but it is a little bit bigger of a screen resolution. So Xubuntu is using XFCE. It's using XFCE 4.14, which is the latest version of XFCE. XFCE, again, it doesn't see very fast development. And when they do have a major release, they don't do major changes. They don't completely change, the desktop paradigm. They don't completely break your workflow that you've gotten used to. So if you don't like a lot of change, XFCE is the perfect desktop environment for you. XFCE is also quite light, very fast, runs great on old hardware, and if that sounds like the desktop environment for you, Xubuntu is a great XFCE distribution. Once again, the same basic packages installed, so it's going to be using the Linux kernel 5.0, of course. All these will be using 5.0. Web browser, once again, is going to be Firefox 66. Nothing to see there. LibreOffice, again, 6.2.2.2, except one thing to notice here is that in the previous versions of Xubuntu, they did not include the entire LibreOffice suite. All they included was Calc, the spreadsheet program, and Writer, the word processor. Now they are also including Draw, Impress, which is the presentation software. I think that's very nice that they're including that by default, and LibreOffice Math. So you have the entire LibreOffice suite installed by default, where previously you only had Calc and Writer. The other big change as far as pre-installed programs is GIMP is now installed by default. I think that is a wise move too. I really think GIMP probably should just be pre-installed on every version of Ubuntu. I think the program is that popular, and I think most people probably wouldn't mind it being on the system. If you're installing things like Shotwell for Photo Manager and Krita and KDE Plasma, GIMP is probably worthy of adding a few extra megabytes to the ISO. In Xubuntu 1904, there have also been some tweaks to the GTK themes. The file manager now has the GTK3 version, so if I open up the file manager, by the way, is Thunar 1.8.4, you will see a very clean theme. I really like this light colored silvery theme. Would really contrast well with a dark wallpaper, although they have a dark wallpaper, this blue and orange wallpaper. I want something really black, maybe a really black or gray wallpaper. Matter of fact, we could check the wallpapers. You guys know I love checking the wallpapers. If I go to desktop settings, they do have a few different wallpapers. Let's see, do they have anything really dark? Not really. That one's pretty dark. Let's check that out. And now, yeah, that really pops there. So that is Xubuntu 1904. Once again, no major changes with Xubuntu 1904 because, again, it uses the XFCE desktop environment, which is slow as far as change. Let's take a look at Lubuntu 1904 Disco Dingo. So Lubuntu uses the LXCute desktop environment, so let me log in. I will say the login manager is not very well themed. Looked rather hideous, to be honest, but once you log into the LXCute desktop, very clean, very polished. Actually looks great for an LXCute desktop. I love the wallpaper, by the way. The theming also is nice. I like the dark theming of the panel. If you're going to do a dark theme, though, maybe not such a dark wallpaper, maybe a lighter wallpaper. We may take a look at the wallpapers. I really like how everything just loads instantly in LXCute. So did you see how fast that file manager just opens up? If I do and minimize, it just goes away. It does have some animations enabled by default. So if we go to the menu system and look for About LXCute, you will see we are using the latest LXCute 0.14.1. LXCute is actually seeing pretty fast development. LXCute grew out of the old Razor Qt desktop environment and the LXDE desktop environments. Those two projects kind of merged, although you can still install LXDE as a desktop environment. If you're used to LXDE, you probably should go ahead and migrate to LXCute. It is the future. By the way, we're using the Qt 5.12.2 libraries for programs installed by default. Much of the same. We go to Internet, you will see Firefox is installed, Firefox 66. Just as all the other versions of Ubuntu we're taking a look at. But for a email client instead of Thunderbird, they're using Trojita. That is a strange choice in my opinion. If you're going to go to the trouble of installing, a big bloated web browser like Firefox, which I think most people want something like Firefox or Chromium. They don't want a lightweight, minimal web browser because for the most part, those things are buggy and they don't work. So if you're going to install Firefox anyway, go ahead and install Mozilla Thunderbird for email client. I think that's what most people would want to use rather than Trohita. Also under Internet, we have Quassel for an IRC chat client, which is one of the standard KDE programs. That's interesting. They went with Quassel, where Xubuntu went with Conversation with a K. Also, we have the Office Suite, and again, the entire LibreOffice suite. So I love this in both Lubuntu and Xubuntu. We have Calc, Draw, Impress, Math, and Writer installed under Graphics. We don't have GIMP. I think that's unfortunate, but we do have LX Image, LibreOffice Draw. We have a screenshot utility and Scanlight. We really don't have any proper photo editor or any proper image editor. Under sound and video, we have VLC Media Player. I think that is the smart choice, and I believe this is the latest VLC, which should be 3.0.6, and it is. If we go to System Tools here, Discover is our graphical software center. Let's open up Discover. And just like it is in the Plasma version, Xubuntu, in Lubuntu, Discover really doesn't look right, at least not in this VM. I'm actually curious if it would look right on physical hardware. I don't know, but that looks, it's unreadable. It's unusable as is. So let's close that out. It is worth noting Lubuntu is the only one of these 6 flavors of Ubuntu I'm taking a look at today that does not use the Ubiquity installer, the standard Ubuntu Ubiquity installer that you've been using for years and years and years. Very nice graphical installer that, you click OK 3 or 4 times and you're done in about 10 minutes. Lubuntu has decided to switch from the Ubiquity installer over to the Calamares installer, which is also a really nice installer, graphical installer. Very similar. You click OK 3 or 4 times and you're done in about 10 minutes. Let's take a look at Ubuntu Budgie 1904. Now, Ubuntu Budgie is going to have a bunch of changes because the Budgie desktop sees a lot of changes with its development because it's a rather new desktop environment that it sees rapid point releases and major upgrades. One of the first things I notice about Ubuntu Budgie, and one of the things I really love about Ubuntu Budgie, is how it differentiates itself from other Linux distributions out there. Many Linux distributions out there are just doing the same old tired thing. If you've seen one XFCE Linux distribution, you've seen them all. If you've seen one Plasma Linux distribution, you've seen them all. Where with Ubuntu Budgie, when you think of the Budgie desktop environment, you think of Solus and really Ubuntu Budgie, and they are completely different in the way the Budgie desktop environment looks. Solus has one panel by default, and it's at the bottom of the screen. It's very traditional, kind of that Windows kind of paradigm. Ubuntu Budgie, what they have decided to do is go with a top panel with the menu at the top and a dock here at the bottom center. This is the plank dock, almost rather Mac-like in that kind of a look and feel. We also have some time and date information here on the desktop. Before you go thinking that Conky is installed, this is actually some kind of Budgie applet. This is not Conky. So if I brought up a terminal, for example, and I've done this before thinking this is Conky and I don't want it on my desktop, and you go to kill all Conky, Conky's not here. So what the hell is that? That is a widget. That is one of the Budgie widgets that Ubuntu Budgie has installed by default. I'm going to go to the top menu, and if we just take a look around, a really quick look around at what is installed by default. Once again, Firefox version 66 is the default web browser. That is a little bit of a different change in some past versions of Ubuntu Budgie. I know they were using Chromium as the default browser, but they switched to Firefox. Actually, I think they switched to Firefox in 1810. So just the last couple of versions, they have been using Firefox. If you go to graphics, again, no GIMP installed on Ubuntu Budgie. I think that's unfortunate. We have the image viewer, we have LibreOffice Draw and Simple Scan under graphics. We also have the Office category, and here we have Calc, Impress, Math, and Writer. Under Sound and Video, we have Cheese for a webcam application, MPV for video player, and Rhythmbox is the music player. I go to System Tools, and I click on Budgie Applets, This is a really neat aspect of the Budgie desktop environment, or these desktop applets. So you have this program here, you find your applet and you click install applet, and it should just pull it down and install it for you. So you have applets for brightness, application launchers, auto keyboard switcher, brightness control. As a matter of fact, the auto keyboard switcher is actually already installed. You see I have a remove icon here instead of the install icon. Anyway, you have looks like a couple of dozen of these desktop applets that you could install and remove after you install them if you want to get rid of them. So pretty neat stuff there. Let me close that out. If I right click on the desktop and I go to desktop settings, for those of you that prefer a dark theme, there is one here. You just slide that and we now have a really nice dark theme. I actually may just stick with that. We have icon set is Pocillo. That is interesting. I'm not familiar with that particular icon set. Let me open up the file manager. It's a nice blue icon set, actually kind of reminiscent of the elementary icon set. If I right click on the desktop, change desktop backgrounds, I just can't help myself. Let's see some of the wallpapers. This is a beautiful wallpaper pack that is included here by default in the Ubuntu Budgie 1904. I mean, that is just gorgeous. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to go through the rest of the wallpapers. That is just fantastic. So that just looks really, really nice. Let me open up that file manager one more time. One thing, what is this file manager? Is this Nautilus? I don't think it is. Yeah, if I clicked here on the title bar, it gives me a menu. And now if I go to help, yes, that's what I was suspecting. That is Nemo 3.8.5. That is a change. I know they were using Nautilus as their file manager, the standard GNOME file manager Nautilus, but I think that's a pretty smart change. I think Nemo, quite frankly, is a better file manager. I think any file manager actually is better than Nautilus because the GNOME development team, for some reason, they have really neutered their file manager to the point where it really is kind of useless. One other thing worth noting here is that the fonts have been changed. The default fonts are no longer the Ubuntu font family. They're using Nodo Sans for the default fonts for their applications. I'm not sure I love that. I love the Ubuntu font family. I think that's one of the best font families out there. I really love the Ubuntu Mono font, especially for those of you looking for a good terminal font. Ubuntu Mono is rock solid. Before leaving Ubuntu Budgie, we should take a look at the Raven side menu. It's still very much the same as previous versions. So you have your applets tab, and then you have a notifications tab. I don't have any unread notifications. If I go back to the applets, you have, of course, your calendar. We could adjust volume here. If I had something playing, you would get some music information here. If I had Rhythm Box, for example, open playing some audio. I don't have any audio files to play here in this VM, though. We also have a devices tab down here. So that is pretty cool. So I guess it would give me some input and output devices if I was playing some audio. So that is really handy. That way you don't have to constantly pull up something like Pulse Audio Volume Control to fiddle with your input and output devices. And for those of you wondering if Ubuntu Budgie installs any snaps by default, it looks like they only install one by default, Ubuntu Budgie Welcome. So I guess their welcome greeter is a snap package. So if I search for welcome, yeah, we have Budgie Welcome. Let's see how long this takes to launch. That actually launched very fast. So whatever the problem was with the system monitor launching in GNOME, Ubuntu Budgie Welcome, which is a snap pack, is launching as fast as you would expect. Let's take a look at the latest Ubuntu Monta 1904. Ubuntu Monta made a very strange decision here, because unlike the other 5 editions of Ubuntu we covered today, Ubuntu Monta did not ship with the latest desktop environment. It shipped with Monta Desktop 1.20. But the latest version of the Monta Desktop is 1.22, so why ship with 1.20? Well, according to the Ubuntu Monta team, the answer is simple: stability. 1.20 is stable, where they say the Monta Desktop 1.22 does introduce some underlying API changes in core components, and it may present some problems for Ubuntu Monta 1904. So for now, they're just shipping with 1.20. Also, Monta 1.20, I think, is the version of Monta that Debian 10 Buster plans on shipping once it's released. When you first log into Ubuntu Monta 1904, you get this little welcome screen. You have the option, once again, do you want to send some telemetry information to Canonical to help improve development for Ubuntu Monta. I don't mind doing that since they asked. Thank you, and click continue. And then of course the rest of the welcome screen includes information such as documentation, how to join the community, their forums and chat rooms. You can click software. I'm assuming that would open up our software center, how to donate to the project, how to get involved. Let's open up the software. So it looks like it's stocking the boutique. I kind of like that, how it transitions very cleanly into that. And we have some icons here on the side. If I actually just clicked on an icon, I wonder if that would do anything. It doesn't appear to do anything, but I, of course, could look for games here. And we have the option of installing 0AD and various other games. Actually, quite a lot of free and open source games here in the repository. Battle of Westnoth is really great. Love that game. Taking a look at some of the default applications. Once again, if we go to Internet, Firefox and Thunderbird are both here. Of course, that's going to be the latest versions. So Firefox, once again, will be version 66. The Office category does include the entire LibreOffice suite. So Calc, Draw, Impress, Math, and Writer are here. Under graphics, we still don't have GIMP in Ubuntu Monta either, but we do have the Eye of Monta image viewer. We have the color selection utility, Shotwell for a photo manager, and Simple Scan. Under sound and video, we have VLC 3.0.6 once again, and Rhythmbox and Cheese and Bracero are all here. Now, if I go to the control center here, the Monta control center, and I go to look and feel, and then Monta tweak. Let's open up Monta tweak. Now we can tweak, what icons are on my desktop if I want, trash and network and all of that on the desktop. I hate icons on the desktop, so I'm going to turn all that off. We have the options of how our panels are arranged. By default, we have what they call the familiar layout. It's familiar because it's the old GNOME 2 layout, where you have a top and a bottom panel. I don't think that makes much sense these days to have a top and a bottom panel when you really can get everything on one panel, so let's get rid of that look. Probably one of the most popular options for Ubuntu Monta is the Mutiny layout. So those of you that lament the fact that Unity has died a slow and horrible death, check out Ubuntu Monta. Their Mutiny version here of their desktop actually mimics Unity quite faithfully. If I go to the launcher here, we even have a nice full screen launcher. We have categories. This is actually really, really nice. It's not what the old Unity 7 desktop was, but it's really, really close. If I go back to the tweak tool and switch from the Mutiny layout, we could check out, about Cupertino. That's a good one to check out. I'm assuming this would be a more Mac-like layout. Top panel with the global menu and, of course, dock at the bottom. That is Plank by Control, and then right-click. Yeah, Plank 0.11.4 is the dock. If I go back to the Control Center, and this time click on, let's click on Appearance. We can change the theming. The Ambient Monta theme is enabled by default, but the one I really like is Black Monta. I like dark themes, and for backgrounds, since we're doing a black theme, we should probably pick a light wallpaper. You know what? That looks pretty good. Still not light enough. That's a good contrast right there. You know what? Even better. So this is Ubuntu Monta 1904 Disco Dingo. Not very many changes really at all. Again, they didn't even go with the latest version of the Monta desktop, sticking with version 1.20 rather than moving on to 1.22, which I think, again, although they say it's for stability reasons, 1904 is an interim release. It's only going to be around for 9 months. I understand, in LTS releases, even, mainline Ubuntu, they sometimes don't ship with the latest, really bleeding edge stuff because LTSs need to be rock solid stable. But these interim releases, really, you could almost think of them almost as betas. So really, they probably should have just switched with 1.22, and if it has some bugs, that's good. You can work them out for Ubuntu Monta 1910, and hopefully they get worked out by, of course, 2004 for the LTS. So how do the 6 versions of Ubuntu that I covered today, Ubuntu, Xubuntu, Xubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Monta, compare on system resource usage? Well, I have all 6 VMs fired up here. So there's Ubuntu, there's Xubuntu, there's Ubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Monta. So let's check all their stats in HTOP. For consistency see, let's use the same system monitor for all 6. So is htop installed? Probably not. So let's sudo apt install htop on all 6 VMs. So I rebooted all 6 machines. So nothing is running other than the terminal and htop within the terminal on these 6 VMs, other than the stuff that of course launches by default. So Ubuntu, mainline Ubuntu 1904 with GNOME 3.32. Wow, I was not expecting this. CPU usage, it should be low for all of these. It shouldn't really be taxing the CPU at all in these VMs. But memory usage, RAM, it is only using 627 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM that I gave this VM. That is incredible for a GNOME 3 distribution. I was not expecting that. I was expecting that number to be 800, 900. It wouldn't have shocked me if it was pushing a gig. If we go to Xubuntu with the Plasma desktop, Plasma has been getting rather light and trim here lately. And once again, 596 megs of only 4 gigs of RAM that I gave this machine. That's fantastic for Plasma. So, you know, the heavy desktops, GNOME and Plasma, are really quite lightweight. If we move to Xubuntu, now Xubuntu is one you would expect to not use very much RAM or CPU at all, and it's not hardly using any CPU right now, and only 384 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM. That is to be expected. Lubuntu should be even better, potentially, and it is. Again, no CPU really being used. 344 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM I gave that VM. If I move on to Ubuntu Budgie, now this will be a little heavier. CPU usage, again, next to nothing. 704 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM that I gave Ubuntu Budgie 1904. That's still pretty good. 700 megs is not bad for kind of a big graphical desktop environment like Budgie. And then, of course, Ubuntu Monta. Wow, that is incredible for the Monta desktop. Only 445 megs of the 4 gigs of RAM I gave Ubuntu Monta 1904. Overall, what do I think of the Ubuntu 1904 releases? I think all 6 releases are solid releases. Again, I haven't played with them that much. Taking a look at them in VMs, I may install a couple of them on physical hardware. Ubuntu Budgie in particular, I love what the Ubuntu Budgie team has been doing. I typically do try it out on physical hardware just to keep up with what's going on with the Ubuntu Budgie development, because quite frankly, I love the Budgie desktop environment. If I was going to use a full desktop environment, Budgie's fantastic. It's very clean. It's very sensible. It's an easy workflow. It's really a really GNOME 3 done right. I've said that a million times, but the Budgie desktop environment is what GNOME 3 should have been. So I may actually throw Ubuntu Budgie 1904 on maybe on one of my laptops or on one of my extra drives in my IC dock. In closing, I would like to congratulate the teams behind Ubuntu, Xubuntu, Xubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Budgie, and Ubuntu Monta. Job well done, Disco Dingo. Solid releases all around. Before I go, I need to thank a few people. This show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, Chris, Douglas, Dylan, Leo, Rob, Robert, and Tony. They're the producers of the show. Without them, today's show would not have been possible. Also brought to you by all those fine ladies and gentlemen. You guys see those names on the screen. They help support my work over on Patreon. Again, without these guys, none of this would be possible. A sincere thanks to each and every one of you guys. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider doing so. You'll find me over at DistroTube over on Patreon. Alright guys, peace.